Oh, hey everyone. Red Squad alert. We have a brand new pilot joining our ranks at the Armory today. Let's talk Porkins. Because my favorite part of Star Wars is the starfighter combat, I've been putting more of a focus on collecting pilots, particularly the pilots of Red and Rogue Squadron. So when I found this Jek Tono Porkins figure at Swamp Hag Gaming in St. John's, I knew he was coming home with me. Porkins was released in the year 2000 as part of the Power of the Jedi line. In box, he came with a removable helmet, as well as a Force fact file, which is just a paper fold-out sheet about the character and giving you a bit of a background. The fact that this figure still had the helmet and it wasn't molded on like some of the earlier Power of the Force figures, like this pilot Luke. Look at that thing. It's not coming off, no matter how hard I pull. It's just an additional play feature and detail that makes me appreciate this figure or the Porkins a little more than the Luke. I am still a relatively new collector though, so I'm learning the difference between the Power of the Force and the Power of the Jedi figure. But things like the removable helmet and the more detailed face really stand out on the Power of the Jedi figure. Those are my thoughts on this little plastic man that I found. But I can hear you saying, Will, what about the man behind the little plastic man? Well, Jek Tono Porkins flew under the call sign of Red 6 at the Battle of Yavin, and was the first pilot to be shot down over the Death Star. His reassurance to Biggs,
I can hold it. Pull up! No, I'm all right.
have rung in the ears of Star Wars fans since 1977. I did read the blurb on the packaging, and it did say Porkins was from the planet Bastine 4. A detail that it carried on from Legends into the new canon. Beyond that though, he has a couple cameos and stories from the Certain Point of View book for A New Hope, and gets a couple shoutouts in some Legends novels, but he hasn't been given too much love. That said, there are a couple comic appearances though that we can talk about. The first is issue 12 of the Empire comic, and part 3 of the Darklighter series. Some other issues from this run have been covered previously in lore and Let's Play videos, but it's issue 12 that gives us the most Porkins action. This issue shows us how the Rebel Alliance received both the X-Wings and the astromechs needed for the Battle of Yavin. While he isn't a major character in this comic, there are a couple nice moments where we see him in the background and going to town on some space shrimp. We also see him take care of some business where he beats up some street punks for committing the capital offense of making a fat joke. Listen, I don't think we should tell Porkins about this panel. If he beat up that guy, this would drive him nuts. Anyway, they succeed, there's a heroic sacrifice, it's what you'd expect. X-Wing Rogue Squadron 1/2 gives us even more Porkins action. This comic retells part of Empire 12, specifically the astromech mission. Here, Porkins is given his own introductory panel. He has a nice little moment where he beats all the other Red Squadron pilots in a game of sabacc. And we get to see the insult the street thugs hurled at Porkins, which, as a kid who was bullied, calling someone a hut with a beard isn't the worst. Nowhere near as bad as Space Shrimp Gate. This poor man who is looking to the face of darkness, who has seen things, who cannot sleep. Anyway, the story ends the same. I like these comics. I think the Empire run and the Darklighter stories within that series are really great. Read them if you haven't. Will, I can hear you saying as our parasocial bond only deepens. I wouldn't call these great Porkins stories, I'd just say they're stories where he's present. Have we really learned anything about our favorite rotund rogue? Hold on to your butts, kids, because we're going to discuss the story Stolen Valor from the Age of Rebellion special. Writer and artist John Adams and colorist Chris O'Halloran gave us one of my favorite looks into the life of Jek Porkins. It's a fun little story about what Porkins and Biggs get up to on their vacation. And don't worry, we're going to be doing a lot of extensive close and critical reading on this one. That's right, baby. I'm here to justify to myself the 8 years I spent in post-secondary education. There is a lot to talk about and unpack with these 10 pages. So, let's start with the fawoosh of an explosion. An X-Wing flown by the Tono Tough himself, narrowly escaping. This is what we want from a story about two famous X-Wing pilots. Destruction, chaos, and a moment of character contrast that really fascinates me. These two panels we see a shaken Porkins and a very blasé Biggs. Porkins, clearly shaken from his brush with death, speaks entirely in exclaimed sentences. Whoa, 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 I thought I was dead. Whew. I'm ambivalent about all this carnage, but I love the adrenaline rush. compared to the more relaxed, almost bored-looking Biggs, who can only muster, "There's nothing quite like the thrill of narrowly avoiding death." There's no exclamation, no sign of concern or emotion. The only thing he exclaims is, "Look out, there's one coming your way." With that same bored-looking face, Jek, being the crack shot that he is, vapes the tie, and, flying through the wreckage, collides with a small blue object, revealed to be a hollow of the pilot with his children and wife. In these 7 panels of the tie exploding, the wreckage, collision, and Jek's realization what his actions have taken from a family are heartbreaking. Adams gives us 3 panels for the pilot to live outside his TIE fighter, so he can haunt us the same way the TIE pilot will haunt Porkins. Back at the base, Porkins is no longer ambivalent about the carnage. He is a changed man, dour and depressed by the knowledge of what his actions take from the galaxy. Biggs, on the other hand, is energized now, yelling, "Amazing, Porkins!" The 2 pilots have switched, where Biggs is now enthusiastic and energetic, wanting to see the world beyond his X-Wing, excited to embrace the life outside his job. Biggs wants to celebrate. He suggests watching a holo, going to an asteroid bar, looking at weird hybrid animals for some reason. Seeing how depressed and despondent his friend is, though, he hits on the solution. Let's take a vacation to the planet Earth. You know, the vacation planet Earth, where everyone goes when they need a break. There is an immediate change in the color palette. We are far from the Rebellion's hangars of muted browns and grays broken up by bright flight suits. The orange cliffs and green oceans belong to a different world. The pair are greeted by a resort worker who wants to confirm their booking and reveals to us the fun little joke that they've booked under the names Twigs and Borkings. Here's where that master's degree kicks in. Before joining the Rebellion and getting this great Hoth fit, I spent years reading and examining literature related to the conception of place, specifically to conceptions of place in regards to tourism. So when I see the interaction between our pilots and the staff member, that's the only lens I can really read this through. This resort worker who greets Twigs and Borkings doesn't get a hello or how are you. He is simply told the transport lost their luggage, and Borkings barely acknowledges him, only asks, "Is it true that littering is encouraged here?" That's pretty friggin' rude, in my opinion. The staff member, exhausted by answering this question, I'm sure, only responds by yelling, "By all means!" Explains that there are creatures in the ground that eat garbage and can be purchased as a souvenir. Then he throws his cup on the ground and one of these creatures appears. It's very interesting to me that the creature appears, but we don't actually see it eat the garbage. Now, that could be a limitation with the space for panels, or it could simply be that it's not important. The resort worker confirming that yes, it is alright to litter, that it's alright to break one of the most basic social norms that's out there, is so exciting. Look at them. The knowledge that they can throw stuff on the ground has them grinning like little children. A sentiment that Biggs will say on day 1. Riding this freaky water worm, he says he feels like a child again. And then on day 3, Porkins acknowledges explicitly that he's breaking the rules, but he doesn't care, it tastes good. Day 6, we see an intolerant Biggs as a sand hut where he soils himself. And finally, on day 8, a drunken Porkins proposes to Cubert, and they respond: shattered window, perfume bottle, floor tile, elevator button, double couch, and structural beams. Careful, Porkins. Think you're playing with a live wire there. Watch yourself. Anyway, on the 12th day, they rested and reflected. Porkins, finally feeling rejuvenated, thanks Biggs for reminding him the importance of self-care and how necessary it is to sometimes step outside that social contract. Their thoughts and reflections are interrupted by a new staff member who informs them that the area is reserved and they'd have to leave. But Porkins responds, "We're already sitting here. What do you want us to do?" Before we move on, I just want to quickly talk about this staff member who looks tired, has 3 bags under their eyes, and they're kind of slouching, as if it's already been a long, hard day. And I think it's interesting to look at this alien, as well as the one from the beginning who throws the cup on the ground, who I can't help but think looks kind of angry, squinting through rage. Now, We can say this is just the design of the alien. The species have resting customer service face, and sure. But I would argue that Adams designed these aliens to look tired, impatient, and a little sick of people. As a reminder that yes, there are places like resorts, theme parks, hotels that we see as an escape, a place where social norms, as I mentioned, do not exist, where we're allowed to act the fool. But these places we see as spots of rest and relaxation still represent normal jobs for people who clock in and day out. I think Adams presents a very interesting critique of the idea of a vacation or spots of leisure. And these alien designs are a way of pointing out or saying, hey, don't be a dick if you're on vacation. Say please and thank you. Treat people with dignity. It's the least we can do. Because in this comic, Twigs and Porkins have not. Anyway, jumping back to the story, we see that the two were removed for an Imperial officer, who Biggs claims to recognize. Now this is where we get our vacation hijinks because the two hatch a plan to kidnap the officer and use the information she'll provide for the rebellion. And in one of my favorite panels, we see them confronting the officer with nothing but finger guns under towels. It's classic, I love it, always makes me laugh. Then we get the twist. The officer isn't really an officer, they're just a mother with 6 kids who needs a break. Unlike Twigs and Porkins, who are hiding their identities, this mother wanted to pretend to be an Imperial officer for extra perks. Recognizing everyone is just one bad day away, Porkins lets her go, apologizes for the interruption, and they leave. Reflecting, she's just like us, she needs a break. But then there comes certain and inevitable betrayal, and she calls the hotel staff to help her. There is a chase, a wonderful Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid-esque moment will lead to their getting caught, and the consequences of their action, being asked to leave before a manager is called. And this is where my friends Angry Alien and Tired Alien reappear, just wanting to go home or have a quiet night for once. Back at the office and comfortably Porkins and Biggs again, we see this charming summary of what Porkins has learned from his time away. Every enemy you let get away could grow up to be the next Darth Chokethroat. That's a name I just made up. But the point is, they could come back and hurt someone who means a lot to you, like a relative or bartender. But another rebel at the table pushes back against Porkins, talking about how their cousin had been saved and fallen in love with someone who was a former stormtrooper. And I haven't even touched on the third rebel who chimes in saying if they ever find the imp who had killed their friends, they would just make sure that they torture and bring them a slow, painful death. We see this revelation and how it brings Porkins back to reality. People have died while he was away. While he was away being Porkins, getting married to Cubert, and eating bugs, the rebellion had continued and his friends had died, replaced by new people whose deaths he would likely get to witness and funerals he would actually be able to attend. Porkins is harshly brought back to reality. But wanting to think about happier things, the other rebels start talking about what they want to be once the rebellion or the war is over. Now, don't ask me to explain why. I just really want to believe the person who says they want to be a graphic designer is Biggs. It tickles me. I can't explain it. And then the story ends with a situation that could easily lead into the start of the story. There is an emergency alert called. Depressed since his conversation with the other rebels, Porkins has to be shaken from his despondency, and he rushes to his X-Wing, sitting and waiting for him as he left it, but is confronted by the ghost of the pilot. He takes a moment, centers himself, before he finally climbs into the cockpit. When we finally see him leave the hangar, either the first or last pilot to join the battle, Porkins has a moment to reflect on who he'll be after it's all over. Sabacc cards on the table. I didn't care for this story the first time I read it. It was a silly vacation thing, and I wanted 2 of the most recognizable pilots who died at the Battle of Yavin to get some cool starfighter action. Instead, what we got was these 7 panels at the start of a story and the 7 panels at an end that have stuck with me, have become my de facto version of Jek Tono Porkins. A pilot who participates in the rebellion to restore the Republic, not because it's fun or he gets an adrenaline rush from it, but because he knows it builds something better for the future, despite the lives it takes. This image is now the de facto Porkins that I think of. It wasn't until I was sitting down with this comic to write this video that I realized how much John Adams was able to put into these 10 pages, and how Chris O'Halloran's color work helped draw out these underlying themes. And for a story that I describe as heartbreaking, it's also fun and funny. Lines like the Darth Cutthroat, that's a name I just came up with, are tossed off in such a manner that just highlights how mundane and like everything's water cooler talk that these pilots are having. In conclusion, I think Porkins is dope. You should read Stolen Valor if you haven't, and the Empire comic, top notch. But that's all for us this week. So thank you for joining us, and until next time, may the Force be with you.
No problem here.
Eject!
I can hold it.
Pull up!
No, I'm all right.